What's going on, gents? Today we're going to take a good hard look at one of the most treacherous biomes to negotiate as a patrol. I'm talking, of course, about wetlands. Succinctly put, a wetland is any ecosystem that is flooded by water permanently or seasonally. Depending on the vegetation and the terrain, they can be categorized as bogs, swamps, fens, marshes, etc. They can be salt, fresh, or brackish water, which is a mix of the two. They can be flat, or they can have undulating elevation, but they are almost always in very difficult environment for conducting operations. My goal here is to give some insight so you can tackle these a lot better, and not only that, make what is difficult a little bit more manageable. Let's begin. Most of my American South viewers will be quite intimate with wetlands. Around 6% of the U.S. is covered in some sort of wetland. Most of this east of the Mississippi River. Within these wetlands usually comes a very high humidity and elevated temperatures, anywhere from 90 up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's not counting the humidity in the air and the sun beaming down on you, making those temperatures feel much, much worse. Your first steps to dominate the swamps and marshes will come well before you embark on patrol. Your equipment must be suited for the challenges of the wetlands. We're going to start by taking a look at materials, equipment, and load planning, and that will be the main topic for this iteration. Your clothing and equipment should either not take on water or it should dry quickly. For example, I have this Helicon Tech shirt here. It's a very thin material. It's not hydrophobic. It's not a wet weather clothes or anything, but it is thin. It's breathable. It's a ripstop, so it can handle some of the different types of sharp and pokey plants you might encounter. But most of all is it's quick drying, and it even has mesh for your hot spots like your armpits. If your materials for equipment, if you're buying materials for your equipment rather, or materials you should look at are things like Ultra Comp. This is a Blue Force Gear pouch. You should look for pouches that are laser cut at the very least in order to minimize the amount of fabric and to make them lighter weight. So different materials like laminate, Tegris, Kydex, Ultra Comp, like the Blue Force Gear pouch, and Hypalon are great for these saturated environments because they tend to repel water or they have a low absorbency. Some companies like Cry Precision and Spiritus Systems will have maritime suites. I think Spiritus calls theirs the OTB suite. Understand that these are great for wet environments. Just understand that they are constructed by far and large with mesh. And depending on what sort of abrasives, like vegetation, like briar patches or sawgrass or thorns you might be encountering, you may or may not want to use mesh equipment. That being said, this varies wildly by environment. You might just be getting wet, but there might not be anything too prickly or pointy. So those might be good options as well. Any large pouches and packs can gain weight as they absorb water and become saturated. So you should definitely try to use waterproof covers, and repellency treatments like DWR should be integrated as well. Now, DWR isn't going to make your pack extremely waterproof. It's going to help repel water. It's going to help keep a lot of the water off, but it ultimately has, it isn't the end-all be-all. You're going to miss spots, and there's going to be spots where you're just not going to want to apply it. So I highly recommend getting pack covers, even if you have to get a poncho like the one pictured here in the background, and bungee cord that to your pack. It is not the best solution, but it is better than nothing. Continuing with waterproofing, your contents should be waterproofed using dry bags, such as this. This is a surplus dry bag, or Ziploc packs. If your budget doesn't allow for buying dry bags, you can just go to Walmart or wherever and get some Ziplocs and reinforce them with tape. Magpul DACA is another example of a small pouch that has water repellency. I don't think they're fully waterproof, despite whatever they say, because ultimately a zipper is only as waterproof as how closed it is. So just bear that in mind, that this is these are good options, but they might, if you're not careful and you leave that zipper a little bit untucked, you stand the risk of water ingress anyways. You definitely should be focusing heavily on waterproofing. Many wetlands will have portions where you're going to have to cross water, no matter what, if you want to keep that same route, or you're going to be, you might fall in, something along those lines, to where your entire pack, your equipment might get covered, might get soaked. Understand that in those environments, you might want to double up on your waterproofing inside the ruck as well. They make waterproof bags that are inner liners for packs. I know there's surplus options. I'm sure there's commercial options as well. And in a pinch, you can go and buy a contractor bag and line the inside of your ruck with it. As long as you tie it off, it'll be pretty effective at keeping the stuff inside of it dry, so long as it doesn't tear. That's why I don't say trash bag, I say contractor bag. They're a little bit more durable. Moving on to electronics. Your electronics need to be adequately prepared for whatever wet weather environment you might encounter in a marsh. In particular, give attention to O-rings on electronics. I'm just using a flashlight as an example. You'll see there's a very thin O-ring there. Make sure that all your O-rings are in good condition. Make sure anything that has a screw down top is screwed down tight. Not so tight that you strip the screw, but tight enough that water ingress will not be possible. For those things that don't have great gaskets or waterproofing, such as this GPS, I just try to put them in a Ziploc bag. A lot of stuff, even with touchscreens, can be used from within a Ziploc bag. Something like this with just push buttons. It's very easy, very simple to use. And just make sure to tape it shut if you're not going to be pulling it in or out. Otherwise, you might have to just play the pull it out of the bag, use it, put it back in the bag, shuffle, which, depending on who you are, might be an issue, might not be. And you're going to want to put anti-fog on as many visible surfaces as you can. Main reason for that is temperature dynamics can change quickly, and if you're working out of vehicles or in and out of structures with air conditioning or other HVAC, you're going to have issues with fogging coming in and out of a cold environment and out into a hot one. The humidity is going to definitely mess your stuff up. Of note, make sure to treat not just optics on rifles or, just optics, but make sure to treat lights and lasers as well. You can get degraded performance from lights and lasers depending on whether or not you treat them with anti-fog and the lens gets fogged up. Lasers might not work as they're supposed to. Illuminators might be more flood than the spot you're wanting. And for anything you can't waterproof, like I said earlier, put it in a waterproof bag. You're definitely going to want to be on top of that. I recommend carrying a small bottle of anti-fog. Cat crap is good, but any will work in a pinch. The wet conditions are also going to require ample changes of clothes. At the very minimum, socks and undershirts if you're wearing an undershirt. I know some guys don't. That's cool. Just treat whatever field top you are wearing as an undershirt. Change it. Consistently wearing wet clothing can lead to rashes, infections, and even trench foot, depending on whether you're wearing wet socks for a very long period or not. Your hygiene must be maintained, and I mean that with absolute severity. You need to have a hygiene kit. At the very least, when you're in the field, you can maintain your hot spots, such as your armpits, your groin, your feet. You can use baby powder to help dry those out. I don't recommend it, but that's just what I have on hand. Or I don't recommend it. It's not that I recommend it or don't. It's I don't use it. But I know a lot of people who do. It helps people keep a little less wet. Understand that water in these wetlands can be filled with pathogens, so you want antibacterials. Keep a hand sanitizer, some alcohol spray, something like that in your pack. Neosporin, if you do get a cut in your boo-boo kit, make sure to have that, because those pathogens can find an ingress point through any cracks in your skin. Athlete's foot can be a persistent issue. So at least one person in the patrol, preferably everyone, but at least one, should have some sort of athlete's foot treatment. They make creams, they make sprays, they make all sorts of stuff. You're probably going to want to go with a cream. It's probably going to be more compact, easier to carry, not pressurized like a spray, not going to make noise. But I highly recommend having an athlete's foot treatment. Imagine the nastiest, wettest locker room shower you've ever been in, and that's the entirety of the swamp. So not only do you want athlete's foot treatment, but you want to change these bad boys out as often as possible. Your socks. Your footwear is probably one of the most important things ever. If you want, it's a good recommendation, just kind of a pro tip from me. Bring a second pair of footwear, something lightweight, like an all-black sneaker or something, or a trail runner, to use when you're static, so that you can let your boots and your feet air out. Something that airs out a little better. Some guys will bring Crocs or sandals. I don't recommend sandals. I don't recommend Crocs either. But some companies are making more of a open-footed, just like outdoor footwear, and that is good to implement in order to air out your feet when you're in a static position and you know you're going to be in a static position for some time. But footwear is the most important. Let's move on to boots. In my opinion, boots are the absolutely most important thing that you should be very nuanced about when you're going into a wetland environment. It merits its own special focus. Your footwear should, above all, and I'm going to say this twice, not be waterproof or Gore-Tex if you're going to be in hot weather. I say again, your footwear should not be waterproof or Gore-Tex. If you wear Gore-Tex and it gets full of water, that water has nowhere to escape unless you take off the boot, turn it upside down, and let it drain through the opening or let it air dry. You're going to want a boot with ample drainage holes. These Solomons have 2 drainage ports on either side. There, actually this one doesn't have it, it's on the outside. But it has 2 drainage ports on the inside of the boot. You're going to want a removable inner sole as well in your boot. The removable inner sole is important because once you get these waterlogged, you're going to want, once you bed down or you're static for a long enough period of time, if you switch that second pair of footwear, you can air these out. You can air them out, let them dry. But a lot of inner soles are made out of spongy materials that tend to retain water for a longer period of time. So you're going to want an insole that you can pull out and air dry on its own outside of the boot. That way your boot can get that fuller dry, and your insole can be adequately dried on its own because they do soak up water. And fun trick, if you have extra insoles, let's say you're like me and you buy Super Feet, you can just have a spare set of Super Feet that are dry in your pack. Pull out the old insoles, slide in the new insoles that are hopefully, like always, molded to your feet and tested beforehand. And you now at least have dry insoles in those boots should you need to start moving sooner rather than later before the original insoles have had time to dry. Your footwear should have a long shaft. By that I mean this portion here. With a full lace up to the top. Your cool guy low and mid footwear is not adequate for the conditions that you can find in a swamp. If you're wearing something like these, guess what, buddy? You're going to lose them. You're going to take a foot or take a step inside of deep mud. It's going to vacuum to the bottom of the ground, it's going to vacuum to the floor. The mud's going to seep up. It's going to take that shoe from you, and you're not going to get it back. So I highly recommend that if you're going to bring something like that as a trail runner or as your spare shoe, just remember, don't wear it on patrol unless you have no choice. Go and opt for your main boot with the tall shaft. If it's laced up all the way and you tie it up, it's not going to slip off your foot. And if it does, you're not tying it correctly. That's just what it is. You should not underestimate the ability of the swamp to just take your shoes away from you, because it will. I've seen it happen before. I've seen it happen to people's shoes. I've seen it happen off-roading. I have seen it many times. And dudes are left wondering, they're shoeless, wondering what they're going to do. That will put a stop to your patrol pretty quickly, because most dudes aren't going to continue a patrol barefoot. And that's just the truth. Moving on to other parts of the boot, you're going to want a pretty good tread. A lot of boot companies don't really offer serious treads anymore. This is, even in my opinion, this Salomon tread is okay. I don't think it's aggressive or deep enough, but it's akin to a Panama sole. The old school Panama soles tend to be the best from what I've seen. They're big lugs, don't hold mud as much as smaller lugs do, and they tend to maintain traction a little better. You want that traction and that tread to be substantial, because if it isn't, the bottom of your boot is going to be slick with mud. And if you step on vegetation or you step on a slicker surface, you're going to slip, you're going to fall, you're going to make a ton of noise, and worst case scenario, you're going to snap an ankle or you're going to sprain your leg, and now you're a casualty. All because you didn't want to spend money on the right footwear. And then finally, I'm going to show a quick just footwear. Something to consider is the durability of the boot as well. See, there's a lot of great options in the market for boots, and understand that some options are better than others, even from the same company. For example, this was a boot that I really wanted to test out, and I like everything about this boot. It's a boot. It's made by Salomon. It's an XA Ultra. It's meant for this hot weather. It's got good tread. It's got everything. But this upper material, too thin. Definitely too thin. That is a problem. Understand that materials matter, and durability matters a ton. If you do not have adequate durability, you might have something like that where your boot starts to tear, and that's the last thing you want on patrol. Something that's a boot that's too thin, and it might fall apart on you on a movement. A boot that's too overbuilt, and it's going, all that padding, all that extra material might soak up water, might not dry quickly, and guess what? If it's soaked up with water, that's extra weight that your feet are pulling every step that you take. There are some silver linings to the saturated conditions, depending on where you're at. If you are lucky enough to be in freshwater, bog, marsh, swamp, etc., you will never be lacking for water, so long as you have a way to purify and filter your water. Dehydration and resupply for water is going to be a much easier problem to solve if you're in these freshwater environments. Unfortunately, that doesn't extend to brackish or saltwater. You cannot easily purify or filter those, as far as I know. Maybe something will come in the future that makes me eat those words. Hopefully they do, because I live really close to saltwater. But for now, if you are in those freshwater environments, there's even, where I'm at, there's even tricks where you can just kind of dig a hole, and the ground is so saturated with water that it just kind of seeps up into the hole. So you can resupply by literally just kicking, by just using your e-tool and digging a small hole, and the water just seeps in. Pre-filter it to make sure you don't get all that dirt and nasty stuff. Purify it, and then you're good to go. You're going to have to play to your conditions no matter what. However, even if you are in salt or brackish water environments and you can't just resupply off the ground or off of a creek or something, understand that because of where marshes tend to be, especially if you're in the American South, precipitation can still offer you a possibility to top off your water. Set down a poncho, dig a hole, have it collect water, rainwater, if you know that rain is coming or if you see it, and filter and purify, put it back into your bottles as see fit. Whatever purification you do decide to use, and hopefully you're doing both a filtration and a purification, I highly recommend a taste supplement, something like Propel packets, electrolyte packets, Gatorade, etc. Bog water is not tasty. You can definitely taste it no matter what you do. You'll taste something. Or even if you don't taste anything or you don't think you taste anything, you still know that you're drinking bog water. So at the very least, you can make it a little more appetizing. I recommend electrolyte packets, even just ideally electrolyte packets so you can get those salts and your body isn't, always yearning for them because you're going to lose a lot in sweat. But even just stuff like Crystal Light packets, lemonade, the stuff that comes in your MREs, that sort of stuff. It'll be a quick morale booster and it'll help take away that nasty taste. And it'll be more apt to drink water if it tastes like lemonade than if it tastes like poo water. So just keep that in mind. A quick historical side note though, LERP units in Vietnam, they would get bouillon cubes and they would purify their water, and even after adding the taste, basically the tablets to take the iodine taste away, even after adding that, they still would have a very particular taste. So they would put a bouillon cube inside of their canteen when they purified it, when they purified water. And that bouillon cube was like their OG Gatorade. You would get all of your salts and minerals that you've lost while sweating on patrol. The water nasty taste would go away, and you would be more apt to drink your water that way because it doesn't taste, again, like poo water. It tastes like soup. So just bear that in mind with your hydration. I personally recommend a supplement of some sort. I've mentioned this elsewhere, but bugs are going to be a pretty significant problem. And so just kind of to finish off equipment, understand that you should treat your equipment with some sort of repellent, be it something DEET-based, like these off sprays, or what I prefer is permethrin. Permethrin works by, it's a toxin to flying insects. Basically, you treat your clothing in it. You use something like this. You spray your clothes. You let it air dry. You spread it around. Make sure it's there. And when you put it on, it's safe to wear and everything. It's safe to sweat in. Just be careful about the concentrations of some of your pets. Let it air dry somewhere where animals and children can't get to it. But once it's dry, it works by killing flying insects that come into contact with it. I think it's some sort of nerve agent. You should treat all of your equipment with it. You should treat your clothing, you should treat your boots, you should treat your packs, you should treat your gear, all of it. As far as I know, there's no IR drawback to it. It doesn't give you a signature at all. And it only helps you keep those bugs away. Biggest problems in my area are deer and horseflies and mosquitoes. Either of those will 100% or mess with your resolve on a patrol. They'll be annoying as hell. And you're going to be continually trying to get rid of them, swat at them, etc. I've seen it. Dudes lose their composure just to try to swat a horsefly away because for some reason they really like to fly by your ears. This will keep them away. I also encourage the use of head nets, that sort of thing. But to me, the king is always going to be permethrin treatment. People use thermocells, I do as well. I think they're limited effectiveness, but I figured I'd mention it. Thermocells are cool. They sometimes work. They require more moving parts. Just go buy a bottle of permethrin. Treat your stuff. Treat all of your equipment. Make sure it's uniform, and I think you'll be good to go. And then when you're on patrol, make sure your skin is covered. Any exposed skin, you're not going to want to spray permethrin on yourself. That's where these off sprays come in. But the more you can cover up with that permethrin treated material, the better off you'll be in the long run. But enough about your gear. Your planning needs to be just as much on point. By and large, the wetlands are an infantry environment, in my opinion. Any motorized movement will require some significant and extensive route planning. You're going to need a ton of recovery gear, and you're going to need specific vehicle features, four-wheel drive, mud tires. Even that might not be enough. Some vehicles will never ever be able to effectively move through a wetland environment unless they're traveling on paved or otherwise built roads. So just bear that in mind if you're planning a motorized patrol. In some places, you might even want to opt for ATVs. You might want to opt for horses. I can't comment on that. I don't have any experience with horses. And some places are going to be so saturated with water that your best bet is going to be inflatables or airboats. So this book right here, you need to, if you're planning on motorized things, you need to memorize. You need to buy books like this. And you need to understand that even with all of this knowledge, it still might be worthless. Because that's just how I look at the wetland environments I've been in, is they are infantry environments. If you have helicopters, good for you. I'm happy for you. Congrats. That any talk of vehicles is a talk for another day. So my focus will be on dismounted infantry movements and patrols. Your first order of business, planning-wise, is going to always be a map. Now, when you're getting maps, you're going to want several different types of maps accessible to you, and you're going to want satellite imagery with them. You're going to want things like USGS maps. Just understand that any USGS map or maps that you might order online, they might not give you the most detail that you want, such as the one pictured. You can see that there are some green patches. Those are supposed to be forest, and then you have that little reed symbol. That's the symbol for wetland. So that some maps will paint a broad stroke, and they're just like, yep, this is all wet, and that's it. This is all swamp. The reason they do that is because these environments change pretty often, and because of those changes, basically they can't continue to update the maps every year, every week, however often. So by and large, they'll just paint that broad stroke, and you might get the more established forest labeled in green, but a lot of it is you're going to miss a lot of that detail. Understand that a lot of those environments, a lot of these wetland environments, their landscape can change rapidly, both due to weather and natural disasters such as wildfires, up to urban development. You might have an old map that says that there's a swamp there, and you go on your patrol and you walk past and you realize that there's a housing subdivision there. So understand that you need as up-to-date information as you can get, and if some of the areas you can drive by in quote-unquote peacetime, you should do that and get actual eyes on. Those of you in the American South are quite familiar with hurricanes, and these storms, as we all know, can drastically alter the area around you. Some areas become impassable, others open up. Water levels ebb and flow significantly. You might have some areas that are flooded that should never have water, and you have other areas that should have water that are drained of everything. So just bear that in mind, that significant weather events will change that landscape, and it might not match your maps or your satellite imagery. So understand that while maps give good estimates, you need to trust but verify. And if you can get, like I said, if you can get eyes on out there, do it. When planning your routes of travel, you have to outweigh the drawbacks and benefits of using wetlands, particularly low-lying areas above water level. While all of us prefer to travel on dry land because that's what we're used to, understand that your opposing forces also believe in the same thing. They're going to take the path of least resistance almost always, or at least that's what we train for. We assume a lot of the time that most of our enemies are lazy, and while that's not always the case, it is the case a lot of the time. So they're going to be sticking to the high and dry. No one wants to be uncomfortable, but that's what sets you apart. You're okay with being uncomfortable, right? Anyways, these areas above the water, you're going to need to know, and you're going to need to integrate them in your plan, because they're going to end up being your bedding areas, your patrol bases, and places where you erect fortifications. If you're going on a raid, chances are it's probably not sitting in 3 feet of water. Chances are whatever you're raiding is going to be on somewhat dry land. So bear that in mind too. If you're thinking about reconnaissance patrols just to kind of see what's out there, understand that those elevated areas are probably going to be nexuses of activity, and use that to your advantage and to the enemy's disadvantage. Your speed of travel on foot will be quicker on solid ground. That's for the most part true. But understand that because of the nature of some wetlands, you're going to get a lot more impassable vegetation on elevated areas. What I mean by this is you're going to get a lot more trees, thick trees, and they might have dense undergrowth because it's always wet and the soil's built for all that humidity. That's not always true. Mangroves grow in water, and mangroves are pretty hard to traverse. I'd almost say impassable in certain areas. So you have to play that to your specific conditions. You tend to have less issues with mud in the higher and drier routes, and less issues with mud mean less odds of you leaving a significant trace like footprints and dirt behind. However, that's not to say that it isn't possible in those elevated conditions. In lower saturated ground, especially areas that are kind of waterlogged, there might be mud, sure, but any standing water, depending on how deep it is and how murky it is, can help occlude those footsteps. Dudes might opt to walk in a small creek because it's a lot harder to track someone inside, like if they're moving within a water feature or a significant amount of standing water. And it's easier to kind of like disorient any tracker going through it. The water, especially if it's murky, hides any steps that you would have left. That being said, it slows you down like crazy, and it can make noise depending on how quickly you're trying to move. Not only that, different aquatic plants in different areas might also make traversing those areas extremely difficult. So you really need to take that into account. I am not joking. Like it's something that you might, this planning phase might require you to actually go out there and like get eyes on some of the routes that you might be planning if this is for like a bug out scenario or something like that. So just keep that in mind. Also understand that wildlife, not just mosquitoes and horseflies, pose a significant issue. Depending on the type of wildlife, they might like higher elevations as opposed to lower elevations. Higher elevations would be your bigger mammals, you know, stuff like wild hogs and boars, deer, bear, that sort of thing, coyotes. And understand that in your lower lying wetter areas, you might have things, especially if you're in the south, alligators and crocodiles, snakes, snapping turtles. So again, be careful about your routes, be smart, you know, take only as much risk as you think is acceptable, because who knows, you might step on the wrong thing and lose your foot. Even in some of the water crossings, understand that bull sharks, at least in North America, have been seen very rarely. It's extremely rare, but you know, you might get lucky. You're exponentially increasing your chances of getting attacked by a large swamp creature if you're in the swamp. But that is a good thing too, because if you need to forage and hunt or fish, the wetlands tend to offer quite a bunch of opportunities. At least in my area, I know that there are fish everywhere. I've seen tadpoles and frogs just show up out of the blue after a rain, just pop out from the ground. You know, turtles everywhere. So at least in my area, you have a ton of opportunities for food if you need to. And understand that by far and large, those are going to be concentrated around streams and like more consistent water crossings. The pool, the limestone pool that forms after a heavy thunderstorm might not have as many animals as the dedicated stream. That has always been there. Canals are a major feature in many areas. Dredgings and things like that are man-made can form features, and they're usually pretty straight. They're man-made, so efficiency is in making them straight. And they can be pretty deep. So understand that in your planning, if you're going to be dealing with canals, you're either going to need to cross them the old-fashioned way with ropes, swimming across, that sort of thing, or you're going to need to negotiate them by crossing bridges, which, you know, depending on your speed and the parameters of your environment, might be good, might be bad, might put you to some risk, might get you in an ambush. Likewise, if you control those bridges, you control those crossways on the canals, you can be the predator instead of the prey. Understand too that a lot of canals and rivers and stuff like that are man-made or used quite a bit by man will be bordered by roads, so they're going to present consecutive linear danger areas, which, depending on who you are, might be an opportunity or it might be a significant headache. So just understand that a lot of canals on either side will have some sort of dirt road that will be elevated to account for rising canal levels from precipitation, flooding, and whatnot. So you might find yourself in a situation where you're doing a water crossing and a vehicle might drive by. Cars, surprisingly enough, can sneak up on you. Ask me how I know. Finally, consider that a lot of wetlands do not have any tall overhead cover afforded by trees. This is true of the Everglades. It's mostly a savanna. Actually, if I open this up right here, let's see if they have a, here you go. So, all of these pale areas here are grass savannas, whereas all of this green is mangrove, they're mangrove forests. Those savanna type areas have no overhead cover. You are out in the open in elephant grass. So understand that if you're worried about aerial observation, you need to be smart with your route planning. Again, this is why I say get satellite imagery, cross-reference it with maps. Don't just use USGS maps. Get maps from other sources. In my case, I'll even use the park map. Like, I know it's stupid, or it sounds stupid, because, oh, well, anyone can get that. Yeah, correct. Anyone can get any of these maps. Unless you go and build your own unless you're a cartographer and you build your own map, that's on you. So, if you're worried about aerial observation or long-distance observation by anyone, understand that you need to know those more covered and concealed wooded routes, and understand that some of those wooded routes, depending on the vegetation, are not going to be traversable anyways. Those green areas on that Everglades map are mangroves. Mangroves are really tough to walk on. If you look at a picture, it's all elevated roots, and everything below it is water. And it can be anywhere from 1 to 2 inches deep, and they grow really close together. They're really great at protecting the ground from erosion and hurricanes. They're really bad to actually try and cross through. They will slow down your movement significantly. In conclusion, guys, this will be the first of what I hope to make a series of things to consider, things to know, things to tackle when you're going through the swamps. This is literally all the stuff. This is only a fraction of the things that you should do before stepping off. I haven't even gotten to the actual patrol yet. And as you can see, there's quite a lot to talk about. It's not a unique environment worldwide. I think every continent except Antarctica has some sort of wetland. And even places in North America will deceive you, or surprise you rather. You might have areas, there are areas in the Arctic taiga that very much turn into swamps. And you might want to tackle those differently than what I'm telling you. Most of my advice and experience is in temperate, subtropic, and tropic swamps. And because of that, you're going to, this advice is really only for those areas. So it covers most of America, some of what you'll encounter in the Caribbean and around those latitudes. As always, trust but verify. Do your own research. You're going to have to do your own legwork with a lot of these areas. They are not intuitive. They present many problems. I mean, I mentioned just insects alone. You can get chikungunya, you can get malaria, you can get dengue fever, and you will die. Like, that stuff can kill you. So that's just the bugs. We're not counting any venom like spiders, black widows, that sort of thing in the American South. We're not counting alligators that can eat you. We're not counting sharks on coastal swamps. We're not counting any of that. And those are the things that just are always there. If you're worried about other people, understand that a lot of these areas tend to form, if they have hunting communities, those hunters tend to know a lot about these areas. So they can be a great resource, but in a calamity, they could also be an opposing force. So just understand that. In the future, I'll make more videos covering the actual patrol, some of the different methods you might want to undertake if you're on some long-range patrol through a swamp or a wetland and you're wanting to be successful. But for now, this is just planning and equipment. I hope it's a good primer for y'all. As always, let me know if you want to see anything else. Not really a gear video, although kind of a gear video. Anyways, guys, take care.